IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, as supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy with Takshashila Institution. My name is Sachin Kalbag and I'm Senior Fellow at the Takshashila Institution. Today with me is Yusuf Unjhawala. He's a Senior Scholar at the Takshashila Institution. Today we're going to talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's state visit to France last week, and we will see what the strategic importance of this visit is. In 1998, when India conducted a nuclear test during the prime ministership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the entire Western world had shunned India, and the US, in fact, had threatened major sanctions because it felt India's actions would start a nuclear arms race in Asia in general and in South Asia in particular. Canada, Japan, Pakistan, and even the United Nations condemned India for reigniting the threat of nuclear war in the subcontinent. But one country stood apart from all of these, and that was France. It understood the strategic importance of India's nuclear tests, not only for South Asia, but for the rest of the world. In 2005, when India was lobbying hard for the civil nuclear agreement with the United States, a pact that could potentially open doors for India's self-reliance for nuclear power, it was once again France that supported India. The then French President Jacques Chirac made strong pro-India statements to the US during that crucial time. The strategic partnership that began in 1998 is now celebrating its 25th anniversary. India's relations with France were further sealed in 2016 with the buying of 36 Rafale aircraft for the Indian Air Force, some of which participated in the July 14 Bastille Day celebrations last week. Now, close on the heels of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's successful and strategically significant state visit to the United States, a podcast on which we spoke about with both Yusuf and I spoke about a couple of weeks ago, came the state visit to France, where India signed many more agreements with the European nation. India formalized the UPI agreement with France, and now Indians, for example, can pay in rupees at the Eiffel Tower to begin with. The joint statement of the two countries highlights the three pillars on which the relationship will be based on for the next 25 years: a partnership for security and sovereignty, partnership for the planet, and partnership for the people. In the partnership for security and sovereignty, there were several subheads in the joint statement. They include defense, which is a continuation of cooperation on fighter jets and submarines following the timely delivery of the Rafale jets to the IAF, and the success of the P-75 program, which includes the 6 Scorpion submarines. In space, the scientific and commercial partnership being enhanced through several agreements between CNES of France and India's ISRO. Civil nuclear energy, which includes the progress in the 6th EPR power plant project in Jaitapur in Maharashtra. Indo-Pacific strategic agreement, Indo-Pacific strategic region, the adoption for roadmap for joint actions in the Indo-Pacific covering all aspects of a comprehensive strategy, counterterrorism, critical technology transfer, civil aviation. In the partnership for the planet subhead, the several subheads include plastic pollution, health, the blue economy, which includes the launch of a partnership on ocean research between the two countries, financing, the energy transition, and decarbonized hydrogen. In partnership for people, a very important point includes student mobility, which is a new target of welcoming 30,000 Indian students in France by 2030 by issuing 5-year short-stay Schengen visas for students with a master's degree who have studied at a university in France. There are other issues as well, which are important: diplomatic and consular networks to be expanded, cultural relations to be expanded, research relations to be expanded, and sports and civil society as well. Yusuf, wow, that was a huge and important strategic joint statement between India and France. I want to go into detail into each of these with you, but overall, the 2-day state visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to France, your 5 takeaways, maybe 3 to 5 takeaways from the visit.
Thanks, Sachin. Good to be back with you following the last state visit of PM to the United States. I think the key takeaway is strengthening ties. India and France share historical ties. Ever since our independence, we've had strong defense ties with France. We have flown their aircraft since 1950s. And like you mentioned, it has been a strong supporter of India. It was one that did not sanction India and supported India's nuclear weapons test and nuclearization of India. And at the moment, it is one of the key backers of India at the UN Security Council. If you remember, when China took the Article 370 case to the United Nations, France did all the backing for India and made sure China did not succeed in what it intended to do. That is along with the US. Both France and the US backed India. So they are our veto power at the moment. I mean, we can rely on France to make sure that there are no adverse decisions or any action in the UN Security Council. So the strengthening of the ties follows, there's this historical relation that we have. In fact, if you remember, the nuclear weapons that India has, the Mirage aircraft that we bought from France in the 1980s are a key aspect or a key cog in the Indian nuclear wheel. It is used to, or rather, it is primed to use for nuclear weapons delivery. Rafale deal was obviously a big boost to the ties in 2016 or 2015 when Prime Minister Modi went over there, and that deal was signed in 2016. We expect another deal for that to happen, although it has not been announced in the joint statement. But prior to the PM's visit to France, there was a Defense Acquisition Council clearance for the Rafale Marine version, which is for the Indian Navy to operate from the aircraft carrier, 26 of those, and also further 3 add-on Scorpion submarines, which India has been manufacturing at MDL. As the 5 have already been delivered and the 6th one is undergoing trial. So the production line was going to go quiet, and it was very important for us to make sure we make more submarines. So an additional order for 3 has been announced. It was there in the joint statement, but curiously, it has disappeared today. It was there yesterday, I saw that, but it has disappeared today. Maybe it is because there was no cabinet committee on security clearance for it. And I think they remembered what happened last time when PM announced the Rafale deal in 2016. One of the issues raised was there was no cabinet committee on security clearance. The CCS clearance was not there.
Yes,
so
I
think they've been a little careful. Yeah. So I think they've been a little careful and made sure that they're clear on that part. But there is a acceptance of necessity for both these, both the fighter jet as well as the submarine. So we strengthen our ties. We want to further go ahead, and that's the reason why the joint statement is very aptly called, the road ahead. We want to strengthen. We want to now move on to co-development, joint production, and that is one of the highlights of this agreement, joint statement rather, where we have an agreement now between Safran, which is the jet engine maker in France, and India, where they will co-develop and co-produce the next generation of jet engines, which will power India's 5th generation fighter, which is the AMCA. This will be a more powerful version of the F414, which will power the MK1 version of the AMCA, for which the deal with the US has just been announced. It's going to set up a production in India for the 414 engine. So, but India is now going ahead with France to start from scratch, from the drawing board, and this will give India a huge experience in working with France and get a good experience in manufacturing a jet engine, which is something that we have lacked. We have our own program, the Kaveri engine, but it's not headed in a satisfactory manner, and that's the reason why we went with the American engine, the GE engine. So this is the roadmap that we have set, and France being a country which always exercises its own strategic autonomy, and it takes decisions, that suits it rather than, tag along with other countries. We can always rely on France to deliver on our agreements. And it has always been a great defense partner for India. In fact, since our independence, France has been the 3rd largest supplier of weapons for India after Russia, Soviet Union as a bloc, and then as a one entity, and then UK, and then France. And since the year 2000, France is India's 2nd largest supplier of weapons after Russia. So these are very strong ties, and it has only deepened further. We made sure that France does not supply any weapons to Pakistan. I mean, if you remember, Pakistan even today runs or operates the Augusta class submarine, which was supplied by France. It also has Mirage aircraft, but that was supplied in the last century, 40 odd years ago. But that does not happen anymore. France is a key partner in India in taking action against terrorism, terror financing, and that helps India. So it's a very important partnership, and it's great that the Prime Minister was invited on a very important occasion for France, and it just shows the importance of the relationship.
I'm glad that you brought up the two words that are so important for the India France relations, which is strategic autonomy. France and India both strive for it. In fact, when the American lawmakers were talking about India's inclusion in the NATO plus, saying there was a lot of murmurs and discomfort in India, and suddenly about a fortnight ago, the lawmakers in the US dropped that idea of talking India into the NATO plus umbrella. Similarly, France, like you pointed out, has been wanting strategic autonomy. It does not want to tag itself with any other nation, including in Europe, and it wants to take its own decisions. Independent of what the strategic decisions of the other European nations are. So, in that sense, there is clearly a tie-up, at least strategically, between India and France on those levels. But given the importance of the visit soon after the American visit, what kind of message do you think this sends to China? Because India is now deepening its ties with two of the most important, at least in terms of democratic movements. US and France are so close to each other, and clearly, for both of them, democracy means so much. India's long-term allyship with both countries, will it make any dent in China's, or will not a dent, but will it change China's outlook for its strategic thing for the next 20, 25 years?
This is what India is trying to do. I mean, we are trying to develop, or rather deepen our relations with the West, so that we can kind of shape China's policies towards India. But I just go back to your NATO plus thing. I don't think NATO plus was a bad thing, in the sense that it's not that India is joining NATO or in a NATO plus kind of a thing. NATO plus is basically a internal US designation. It's just like how India is a major defense partner. Similarly, the US has designations like major non-NATO ally, which say Pakistan is, and there are other allies of the US which are not in the NATO but are very important allies, treaty allies like Australia, Japan, South Korea. These are New Zealand. These are the five NATO. There are five NATO plus countries, and it just only means that it just takes away more of the bureaucracy and makes it easier for arms transfer to these countries. So it is not as if India was joining the NATO. It's just an internal designation. Even Mr. Jaishankar spoke about it, and he was saying that you don't think on those lines, and this is, if the US wants to do something more for us, then we'll be glad to accept. So having said that, you talked about what message it goes to China. I mean, we've been trying to play this out for a long time now. We try to work hard with China ever since Prime Minister Modi came to office back in 2014. I mean, if you remember all the Chula thing and all that went on, and it was him trying to come out to some kind of a modus vivendi. But it didn't happen. We had Doklam, and then the worst incident of all, the Galwan, in which we lost 20 of our brave soldiers. And that has completely changed our ties. I mean, from all the statements that Prime Minister Modi has made in the US Congress, he said, dark clouds are casting shadow over the Indo-Pacific, and obviously he's pointing to China and what China is doing over there. And then now, just before going to France, he gave an interview and he talked about how India wants peace. There is no doubt about it, but it's not assured. And this was a response question on China. So it's kind of, gives away the internal assessment in Delhi that, India-China ties are irretrievable. I mean, it's not something that we can salvage, at least not for a long time to come. So all our now actions are now coming together with like-minded countries where we share values, we share common interests and common goals, and we come work with them and kind of deter China from taking any adverse action. So the visit to the US followed by France is very important. Also, if I would like to bring in what's happening with NATO. I mean, they are now trying to have some kind of a say in the Indo-Pacific region. They want to open an office in Japan, which is something which has been opposed by France, though, and it says that it's not a good idea. But these are conversations which are happening. Very soon, we might have some kind of presence of NATO in the Indo-Pacific. India will have to take that into calculation. We've had dialogues. We have had political dialogues with NATO. I mean, I think the last one was in 2019. or maybe 2020. So we are also engaging with NATO, and US and France, with whom we share very good bilateral ties, are obviously very important members of NATO, and that helps. Incidentally, we have logistics agreement with both these countries, where we have reciprocal basing, logistics sharing agreement, not basing, but logistic sharing agreements, and these are very important agreements for both countries. Where India operates far away from our own coastlines, we get fueled by U.S. warships, for instance, and similarly it can be French warship. And France has a lot of islands across the region which India can utilize. So a lot of things which are coming into place. What is important for India is to not take any half measures. We have to go the whole hog, not only in security dimension, but utilize all this for development of our country. This is the most crucial aspect of our foreign policy. Ultimately, everything that we do is linked to our development. We have set a target of 2047, the 100th year of our independence, as to become a developed country. And all these are very important, visits where we go out, PM goes and pitches for Make in India, attracting investments in India. Also, getting a diaspora, charged up to and come to India and invest it. So these are very important things for our development.
Yusuf, I was also asking that in the context of what is happening between Australia, the UK, and the US, the so-called AUKUS allies. Of course, it's not a new strategic alliance, but the fact is that both the US and the UK are extremely interested in strengthening the navy of Australia, so that it can act as a countermeasure, a counterweight in that region against China. With India as an ally of both the US and the French, and of course our long-term relationship with the UK. Given that, I was wondering whether that could actually, kind of trigger China into doing something, some kind of a misadventure that could kind of upset the calculations that India has made strategically in the Indo-Pacific.
I don't know if that would be a mistake on China's part as well. There is the most likelihood of any conflict is going to be an accident. It's not something that might be pre-planned or things like that, because there are a lot of things that are happening. China is being squeezed out of access to technologies. I mean, just recently Germany came out with a China strategy, and talks about de-risking, calling it a systemic rival, which the European nations as a whole have called China as. And they want to be part of the Indo-Pacific framework, and they have a Indo-Pacific strategy. All these countries, all this is kind of going to slowly strangle China. It's going to the US is working to deny access to advanced semiconductor manufacturing technologies, advanced semiconductor designs. Those things are happening. China is out of the 5G network of almost all the Western countries, and also India has blocked them out. So once these policies start to strangle China, I mean, China might just get forced to act in some manner, which is kind of out of frustration. It may not be because it has all the capabilities to do so, but it could just trigger a wide conflict, and even India may not be able to stay out of it. India itself might be one of the targets that China chooses to attack. So these are very, very troubled times. The insecurity is only increasing day by day with all the policies and the countermeasures, all that is happening. And these are very, very troubled times, I would say. I mean, we're kind of sitting on, some kind of a ticking time bomb. We don't know how it's going to explode, what is going to trigger that. So what India is trying to do is make sure that it is not harmed. So all our partnerships that we are working with is just to make sure that, it kind of forms a deterrent mechanism and make sure that China doesn't cross the line.
Yeah, that's kind of a segue into my next question, which I'll ask after this short break. We will take a short break right now and we'll come back soon on the other side. Thank you for joining us in this podcast on the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to France. My name is Sachin. I'm with Yusuf Unjhawala, my colleague at the Takshashila institution. Before we went on break, we were talking about the strategic importance of India and India's relationship with France and India's relationship with the US, and how what is happening with the various countries in the Indo-Pacific, specifically their targeted policies there, is strangling China. And in that context, I thought that the Partnership for Security and Sovereignty pillar that the joint statement spoke about, which specifically speaks about defense, space, critical technology transfer, all of these issues are so important, Yusuf, for India's not only security but also development. Because when we went to the US, and it was a state visit, remember, we still did not get any promises of full the technology transfer. And this is something that we've been talking about for a long time when it comes to the US. But France, on the other hand, has said that there will be technology transfer. So technology has been the center point of India's foreign policy with the US. It is now the center point of India's strategic relationship with France. So, how do you view this really important pillar? Defense, space, civil nuclear energy, Indo Pacific, counterterrorism, critical technology transfer, and of course, civil aviation.
All very important. I mean, you just talked about civil aviation. For a long time, I've been saying that India has to pitch for either Airbus or Boeing to have a production line in India and develop an aerospace ecosystem in India. India is projected to buy about 2,000 to 2,500 civil airline over the next decade. You'd have seen in recent times that we have given a lot of orders. Air India has given orders, both Airbus and Boeing, about 250 each. Recently, 500 jets were ordered by Indigo, placed to Airbus. And even before that, they have a good number of orders placed to Airbus. Similarly, there are other airlines which have orders. So, collectively, as of today, we have about 1,300 odd aircraft on order. And that's a huge amount of money that will go out of India without any kind of, setup over here, which helps our own industry develop aerospace, ecosystem. We don't even have an MRO, which will go a long way in developing a lot of capabilities in-house over here in India. So aerospace is a very important aspect. I don't know why this was not raised. I think it was a miss, or maybe, I don't know why this was not discussed during PM's visit to both the US as well as France. The civil aviation is a very important aspect. Although it is done in the private sector, Airbus and Boeing are private industries, our airlines are private airlines, and their government has no control over them. But still, there can be some kind of a pathway that can be created where, there is incentive for these two companies to come and set shop in India. So talking about that, then secondly, nuclear energy cooperation is a very important aspect. That is what even triggered, or rather transformed, India-US ties. With France, obviously, we have a long-standing relation, and France obviously is a leader in civil nuclear technology. Nearly 70% of its own electricity comes from nuclear power plants. In India, it is hung for a long time. The Jayatapur plant which we have talked about in the joint statement, I think there will be some kind of progress on it. But we are also working on next generation of reactors. These are small modular reactors, about 300 megawatts in capacity. And they don't require to be manufactured on site, but they are manufactured in factories away from the site and then assembled where it has to be assembled. So it kind of cuts cost, and also they are cheaper. And because they are smaller, you can have these small plants all over the place, wherever there is what access to land, water, and everything, and where you can have nuclear power plants. But cutting down costs of nuclear energy is really important, because right now it is very expensive to make nuclear reactors. Cutting costs is a very important factor when it comes to adopting renewable sources of energy and something that's not polluting. Nuclear power is obviously one of the key elements in India going towards a target of net zero by 2070.
Yeah, because it kind of feeds into the second pillar that India and France have been talking about, and which is climate change. So financing the energy transition, the announcement of the nearly 1,000 crore from the French Development Agency to India's flagship Sustainable Cities program. I think it's called CITIUS 2.0. This is in partnership with the European Union and the KfW of Germany. The announcement of the nearly 250 crore in financing from Proparco for the South Asia Growth Fund, which is SAGF3, which will invest in companies in promoting energy efficiency. So France and India have clearly set out a roadmap for their climate change targets, and India has a very, very ambitious climate change target. So, which means that India will have to work doubly hard than it has been doing so far. But it also kind of, contradicts with India's development plans, given our reliance on old or non-renewable sources of energy, primarily coal. So, given this background in India, I thought that the partnership with France, when it comes to civil nuclear energy, and the finance of the energy transition from non-renewable energy sources such as coal to renewable energy sources, is such an important pillar of the relationship between the two countries.
Yes, it is. And if you remember, the International Solar Alliance was also formed in partnership with France. India spearheaded that, and the announcement was made in Paris. So India is working towards, going towards cleaner energy sources, solar, because India is solar abundant. I mean, we have, I think, the highest solar days, I think, in the world. So it makes a lot of sense for us to have, invest a lot in solar panels. The costs are coming down. What is also needed is investment in research in coming up with more efficient solar panels. I mean, recently there was a report where it said that, and this was Chinese study, which or rather development, which has pushed the efficiency up to about 34% or even more. This is something that India will have to invest in as well. Capital as well as access to advanced research, or rather investing in advanced research as well, or co-development with France. This is something that India can look at, both in terms of the investment that can come from France and also the knowledge. But it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, these two, both solar as well as nuclear, India and France can work a lot together.
Yes, in fact, because much of the solar research is happening in Switzerland, in France, in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of efficiency of the panels. I was in Switzerland in 2014 and again this year in 2023, and what I found after speaking to the solar experts there is that the efficiency of those panels is something that the researchers out there are focusing primarily on. So, for example, 20 years ago, when the efficiency of solar panels was less than 10%, it is somewhere hovering anywhere between 15 and 20% now, which is a significant jump from what it was even 15 years ago. So, if India can take advantage of French research, of Swiss research, then perhaps India's cost in terms of energy transition will come significantly down. Decarbonizing hydrogen is something that France and India have spoken about very importantly in the joint statement as well. But I thought that even the other often missed point was the partnership in the blue economy, essentially ocean research. This is something that our strategic analysts have not spoken much about or explored much, but that is something which I thought could be an important point. But it also brings me to another pillar of the joint statement, which was issued last week, which is the people pillar. And the most important part of that people pillar is something that Prime Minister Modi announced in his speech to the Indian diaspora in France, and which is that Indian students with a master's degree will be able to get a 5-year short stay Schengen visa, anybody who studied in the University of France. So this means, and this number is a huge number, 30,000 Indian students should be the target by 2030. So given that India, has successfully, although not completely, kind of, negotiated with the US in terms of, removing the backlog, in terms of visa issuance, in terms of better immigration relations, between the two countries, adding consular offices. The joint statement also speaks about adding, consular offices both in France. I think there's talk about Consul General of India in Marseille and a Bureau de France in Hyderabad, which means that the number of visas from India may also go up. So people-to-people relations, which was one of the biggest pillars of India-US relations, can actually help India-France relations as well.
Yes, I mean, this is what we've been focusing across the world. And it's also an important aspect of our trade negotiations with other countries, people-to-people ties, and even movement of people. Because we just have this large population, we need to educate them, tremendous universities which can benefit our students and obviously benefit our enrich our economy once they, if they choose to come back. And that is, in fact, should be our target, to get all these kids who go out and study, come back and, do whatever they want to do in India. That is obviously, that should be the long-term goal of any Indian government. because there are a lot of people going out, a lot of talent going out, and they enrich those countries, which is good. I mean, they go up to higher positions, even in government. But in the long run, I think we should, if these guys get educated over there and then come back to India, it'll be great for us. But yes, people to people contact is very important. I mean, this is how you develop the shared understanding. You like each other's people. It just makes things so much easier. Understand the culture, the language, the mannerisms, the ways. It just makes things easier.
In all your papers, Yusuf, in all your op-eds, in many of them, when you speak about India's relations, strategic relations with other countries, there are two issues that you focus on pretty hard, and that is India's development and India's security. I think the Indo-French joint statement speaks very, very comprehensively about security and sovereignty. What do you think were the things perhaps missed in the development part, the economics part? The reason I'm asking is that India is on, warpaths, so to speak, on signing free trade agreements with a lot of countries, the UAE, Australia, with the UK. Of course, there are roadblocks. When I was in Switzerland this year, I was speaking to the trade minister there, and she was on her way to India to speak to our Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal to speak about possible free trade agreement between the Swiss and Indians. So clearly, the economics part is something that perhaps needs to be followed up more than what the joint statement says.
Yes, but with France, it is, we cannot have a bilateral free trade agreement. France is part of the EU, and India has been working with the EU quite some time to get this free trade agreement going. I think there was some talk about it, in that context. I think the talks have restarted with EU for a free trade agreement, and we hope that is done soon. And that this will also help with all the people-to-people connect, where our people are able to trade easier with the Europeans, and that will also kind of set up in motion closing of our ties with the Europeans. And since these guys are also looking at the Indo-Pacific more closely and taking on or kind of de-risking from China, India is positioning itself as the key plus one that these countries talk about as far as their diversification of supply chains goes. So but like you said, that aspect was missing, and something which I stated a little while earlier was India, making the move on trying to get Airbus, say, for example, to come and invest in the civil airline industry in India, production line, even. I mean, that should be one of our targets. I think the civil aviation minister in the past has said that time has come for these companies, Airbus and Boeing, to set shop in India. But it should have been taken up at the highest level, and this was a good opportunity, and I think it was missed. These just cost about $100 million, and if you're ordering, say, about 2,000 jets, we're talking a huge number, 200 billion going out. Engines are being sourced from GE or Pratt and Whitney. These are opportunities that India has to create in India. We'll have to work. I mean, it's not easy because these are all private companies. And also, it's our private airlines. It's not that the government has no control over them. But I'm sure the government can figure out a way, it can work with the private airlines over here and then speak with our counterparts in the US and France and the UK and see how we can get something going in India. Because that is crucial, both not only just for the air. Not only will it create an aerospace ecosystem, it will create a whole kind of skill sets over here. It will create a lot of jobs over here, and it's going to help even those countries because they'll be able to cut down their costs as well. Because it'll be easier to rather cheaper to manufacture in India.
Even with the US, Yusuf, if you remember, the prime president and the prime minister said that now our job as government people is over. Now it's up to the private sector to take the whole thing forward. But catalyst in the process were the two governments, the US and the US administration and Indian government. Clearly, that was missing here, perhaps, because the civil aviation part of the pillar of the security and sovereignty pillar talks only of supporting the expansion of the routes between France and India, but not specifically setting up of any Airbus factory out here or anything on those lines. There is some signing of technical and safety agreements, but it's restricted to just that. So clearly, perhaps that's a chance and opportunity missed. But I want to circle back to something that you spoke about right at the beginning, which is the defense relations between India and France. Now, given that France is India's second largest arms supplier, which means that by 2047, which is a 25 year roadmap, what kind of developments do you think India and France should look at to deepen those ties, going beyond Rafale and the Air Force? But we also spoke about Rafale, the Marine Rafales, which are needed for the aircraft carriers. We talked about Scorpion class submarines, which are being made at the Moscow docks. That needs to be expanded specifically in a targeted way. So, do you think that the roadmap is kind of specific and targeted in both these cases?
Yes, it kind of open-ended, right? When it talks about submarines, it says India and France are ready to explore more ambitious projects to develop Indian submarine fleet and its performance. Now, it can be many things. India is not only looking to add, say, another 3 more Scorpion submarines, but the P-75I project, which is was supposed to be a parallel project at one time, but now it's more or less a follow-on project of P-75. So France had dropped out of it. Maybe it can come back. P-76, which is our indigenous submarine program, I'm sure we will be going to the French and ask them to be associated in some capacity, maybe as a consultant. And importantly, and this is where I think France can play a big role, and India can benefit from is naval nuclear propulsion. The French have developed these reactors which work on low enriched uranium, and they have been able to miniaturize it. And not only that, even the refueling is a very, very easy process, rather than cutting open the hull and then welding it back after refueling, which something will be required on Indian nuclear submarines, which are based on the Russian design. So naval nuclear reactors is something that we can pursue with France. I'm sure they would be open to cooperation. This will help not only our ballistic missile submarines, which later on the larger ones, but also our nuclear attack submarines, and more importantly, even our future aircraft carrier. Remember, if and when the next aircraft carrier is given a go-ahead, it will not carry a nuclear reactor, because there was a conflict between BARC, which said the Navy should fund the program and things like that. And first of all, we don't have a reactor which will be capable to power a large carrier. And we were looking at a 65,000 ton carrier. We don't have a large enough reactor to power our next generation of ballistic missile submarines, which will require, say, 190 megawatt reactor. So collaborating with France on this will benefit India a lot. This is one part that I see. Secondly, that we have decided already to do is not only create co-produce the next generation of jet engines for future fighters. There is also an agreement where France is going to transfer technology for the existing Shakti engines, which are powering the Juve and light combat helicopters. That is going to happen. And then we're going to work on another engine with Safran to power the next helicopter that India is working on, which is the multi-role helicopter, which will replace the Mi-17s that are there in Indian Air Force right now. So these are the things which are, and these are the short terms one. The nuclear reactor thing can be a little in a medium term, but these are the immediate things that can happen. The helicopter engines, and then obviously the aircraft engine for the longer term.
Yeah, just to add to that, the current technology that the US and UK use is reactors based on highly enriched uranium, isn't it?
Yes, they use weapons grade basically, at about over 90%. What the French use is about 7% and what happens is that India will not need to enrich uranium to a high degree. It's costly as well as we need uranium for our strategic program, so it just frees up that space for us. And the thing is, the French technology is advanced. In the next generation of their Barracuda nuclear attack submarines in the works, we can greatly benefit if there is any kind of cooperation in that space.
All right, with that, we've come to the end of our time. Yusuf, thank you very much for participating in this podcast. Our 45 minutes are up, but what an enriching conversation this was. Thank you for simplifying everything that has happened with Prime Minister Modi's visit, not only for this time, but also, what's expected to happen in the Indo-French relationship for the next 20 to 25 years. I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you next time. Yusuf, thank you once again.
Thanks, Sachin. Thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takstashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.